There are rules on this reservation that never get written in any manual. They are not printed in procedure handbooks or taught at the police academy. They exist in the space between breaths during a night shift, in the wary glance of an elder, in the stories passed down with a firm hand on your shoulder. They are the 7 protocols. 6 of them are warnings about the land, its history, and its older inhabitants. But the 7th, Protocol 7, is different. It's not about where you go or what you hear. It's about what looks back at you. It's about the thing that wears a human shape, but carries a second face on the back of its skull and arms that end in blades of bone. My partner learned the hard way that ignoring Protocol 7 isn't bravery. It's a death sentence, or worse. This is what happens when the old world refuses to fade, and you're the only one standing watch that MY name is Thomas Crowfeather. For the last 8 years, I've worn the badge of the tribal police for the Black Hills Territory, a vast and sprawling jurisdiction carved from the Dakota Plains. This land is in my blood. My great-grandfather rode through these same pine forests and prairies. My grandmother collected medicine roots in the shadow of the same buttes I now patrol. The connection is a deep, resonant chord, but it doesn't make the job any easier. Our territory encompasses thousands of square miles, a patchwork of tight-knit communities, isolated homesteads, and vast stretches of raw, untamed wilderness where the nearest backup can be an hour away. The social challenges are profound and persistent. Poverty isn't just a statistic here. It's a weathering force, eroding hope as surely as wind erodes sandstone. Unemployment, addiction, the legacy of historical trauma. They form the backdrop of our daily grind. Most of our calls are heartbreakingly routine. Domestic disturbances fueled by despair, accidents on roads that have seen too many ghosts, welfare checks on elders living in isolated silence. But woven into that fabric of modern hardship are threads of something much, much older. That's where the protocols come in. They are the department's unconscious memory, a set of operational guidelines born not from policy committees, but from cumulative experience, tragedy, and a respectful fear of the land itself. No chief ever issued a memo about them. You learn them in whispers from the veteran officer who ride with you, or from the dispatcher whose family has lived here since before the reservation was a line on a map. They are delivered not as orders, but as truths. Listen, kid, they'll say, lighting a cigarette in the pre-dawn gloom. If you ever see stones laid out in a spiral, just don't. Radio it in, and we'll call someone who knows what to do. That's Protocol 1. Protocol 2 concerns unexplained chanting or drumming on a windless night. Your job is to log the location and leave. Do not investigate. Protocol 3 involves sightings of a pure white buffalo calf, a sacred omen. You confirm from a distance with binoculars and immediately notify the tribal council. You never, ever approach. The protocols continue, each dealing with specific, eerie phenomena that fall so far outside standard police training, they might as well be from another planet. Protocol 4. Missing children near the labyrinthine ravines of the Badlands. You only search in pairs, and you cease all search activity the moment the sun dips below the horizon. Protocol 5. The discovery of old bones, not in the cemetery. You don't touch them. You don't move them. You secure the area and call the Cultural Preservation Office, day or night. Protocol 6. Reports of strange, maneuvering lights over the old battle sites. You acknowledge the report politely, and you do nothing. They always fade on their own. Then there's Protocol 7. It's spoken of even more quietly than the others, often with a slight physical aversion, a shake of the head, a rub of the neck. It deals with an entity referred to in the old language, a term that translates roughly to the double walker, or more colloquially among officers, two-face. The protocol is stark and procedural, which makes its content even more jarring. It states, Upon a credible report of a subject exhibiting dual facial features, responding officers will utilize indirect observation methods only. Reflective surfaces, mirrors, vehicle glass, are authorized for visual confirmation. Under no circumstances is direct ocular contact with either facial plane permitted. If the subject closes to within 10 paces and an imminent threat is assessed, discharge your weapon without establishing a direct sight picture. Utilize cover and retreat immediately. Do not attempt to apprehend. When I first heard it, I thought it was a bizarre relic, a piece of spook story folklore that had hardened into pseudo-procedure over decades. My partner, David Littlebear, thought it was outright ridiculous. David was a former Marine, a combat veteran who had served 2 tours of mountains far from here. He was 10 years my senior, built like a wrestler, and possessed a worldview forged in the very tangible, very brutal realities of insurgent warfare. He believed in ballistics, tactical geometry, and the reassuring weight of a rifle in his hands. Spirits and monsters had no place in his universe. It's 21st century policing, Thomas, he'd say, cleaning his service weapon with methodical care. We've got body cameras and DNA databases. You really telling me we're still worried about some storybook bogeyman with 2 faces? That's for scaring kids around a campfire, not for sworn officers. I never argued too vehemently. His experience commanded respect, but my upbringing whispered otherwise. My grandfather didn't tell campfire stories. He told histories. He spoke of the double walker not as a myth, but as a rare and tragic occurrence. A person consumed by a particular kind of spiritual corruption, their darkness manifesting physically as a second, malformed face and weaponized limbs. If you ever see it, he warned me, his eyes holding mine with a gravity that left no room for doubt, you must not look at its eyes. Either set, its gaze is a trap. It freezes the soul, so the blades can do their work. For 2 years, David and I worked the night shift together, a good team. He was a disciplined tactician. I knew the communities and the unspoken rhythms of the land. The protocols rarely came up. We'd get a call about odd lights, follow Protocol 6, and nothing would come of it. It reinforced David's skepticism. See? Acknowledge and ignore. Works every time because it's nothing, he'd conclude. I began to wonder if he was right. Then came the last Tuesday in October. The air had turned sharp and cold, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. We were cruising the northern perimeter, a vast emptiness of rolling hills under a sky so thick, with stars it seemed to hum. The call from dispatch crackled through the static at 11:48 p.m. Unit 4, this is dispatch. Copy. I grabbed the mic. Unit 4, go ahead, Martha. Martha White Elk's voice was our nightly constant, calm and perpetually tired. But tonight, a thin wire of tension ran through it. I've got a call from Alara Tallgrass, out on the old Riverbend Road. She's agitated. Reports a person on the edge of her property. She states the person has 2 faces, one in front, one in back, requesting a welfare check. In the passenger seat, I heard David snort softly, a sound of pure derision. My own stomach clenched, a cold knot forming instantly. Copy, dispatch. Description of the subject other than the facial situation? Tall, dark clothing. Moving slowly west to east along the tree line. She's emphatic, Thomas. And she's not one for dramatics. You know her. I did. Alara Tallgrass was in her 70s, a retired teacher, a pillar of quiet dignity. She did not call the police. For her to make this call meant she had seen something that had shattered her formidable composure. 10-4. Unit 4 responding. ETA 15 minutes. I replaced the mic. The cab of the cruiser was suddenly filled with the heavy silence of our disagreement. Let me guess, David said, his voice flat. Protocol 7. It's the exact description, David. It's the description of a meth head wearing a Halloween mask backwards, or a trick of the moonlight. Delara's eyes aren't what they used to be. He stared out the window at the rushing darkness. This is a waste of gas. The protocol exists because some cop in the 1920s got spooked by a hobo with a skin condition and wrote it down. And nobody since has had the sense to delete it. He turned to me, his features hard in the dashboard's green glow. We'll go. We'll look. We'll find nothing, or we'll find some lost, confused soul. And then we'll write a report that says unfounded. That's the real protocol. I didn't argue. I turned the cruiser north onto the gravel road that led to Riverbend, the tires crunching a rhythm that seemed to chant two faces, two faces, two faces in my head. The memory of my grandfather's warning was no longer a story. It was a manual, and I was flipping through its pages nervously. Don't look. Use a reflection. 10 paces. I checked my side mirror, its glass a porthole into the world behind us. Could I use it to see something clearly? Could I aim without looking? We pulled up to Alara Tallgrass's small, neat house at 12:06 a.m. The porch light was a lone beacon in the oceanic dark. She was already at the screen door, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, her face pale and drawn. She looked every one of her years, and a dozen more born of terror. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice papery thin. She pulled the door open. I know how it sounds. I know, but I was at the kitchen sink, and I saw movement. I thought it was a deer at first, but it was too upright. It was walking purposefully along the far tree line. She pointed a trembling finger toward the distant black wall of pines. Did it approach the house? David asked, his notebook out, his tone professionally neutral. No, it just walked. But when it passed that gap between the big oaks, the moonlight caught it from the side. She closed her eyes as if to block the replay. I saw the profile of a man's face, and then, behind it, the profile of another, smaller, twisted, like a shrunken, angry copy. And his arms, they didn't swing right. They were held stiff, and there was a glint, like he was holding sticks of polished wood. Could have been a trick of shadow and depth. David pressed, ever the investigator. Maybe a backpack with something sticking up? Her eyes opened, and they were blazing with defiant certainty. Young man, I have been looking out this window for 40 years. I know every shadow that tree casts. I know the way the moonlight falls on that grass. This was not a shadow. This was a thing, and it knew I was watching. Both parts of it knew. She hugged herself tighter. It's the double walker. My grandfather told me. You must not look at it. Her use of the exact term from the protocol sent a fresh chill down my spine. David simply made a note. Which direction did it go, ma'am? Toward the creek. It entered the pines just south of the Big Bend. I didn't see it come out. We advised her to lock up, to call us if she saw anything else, and assured her we would check the area. As we walked back to the cruiser, the night felt different. It was no longer an empty void. It was an occupied territory. The wind seemed to carry a low, discordant whisper. Well, David said, slamming his door. Satisfied? An old woman, alone at night, sees something strange. It happens. She described the elbow blades, David, the sticks of polished wood. That's not in the campfire stories. That's specific to the protocol. So she heard the same stories you did. Confirmation bias. He shook his head. Let's go do the perimeter check, so we can log it and get back to real police work. We drove the short distance to the creek crossing and parked. Grabbing our heavy-duty flashlights, we stepped out into the breath-stealing cold. Our beams cut sways through the darkness as we headed toward the pine stand sheet indicated. The ground near the tree line was soft, a mixture of mud and fallen needles. We found the tracks almost immediately. Deep impressions of what looked like heavy work boots, size 12 or 13. They marched in a straight, unwavering line from the east, paralleling the property line, exactly as she'd said. The stride was long, purposeful. We followed them silently, our lights dancing over the prints. They led right to the edge of the pine grove, and then they stopped, not faded out, not wandered off onto harder ground. One print was perfectly defined in a patch of mud. The next print, where it should have been, was untouched earth. It was as if the walker had taken that step and simply vanished into thin air. "What the hell?" David muttered, crouching down. He scanned the area with his light. No backtracking. No signs of a jump. The impossibility of it hung in the air, challenging his entire worldview. Before he could formulate a new theory, a rope, a lift, a wild animal carrying a man, a new sound froze us both. From within the dense blackness of the pines, maybe 30 yards ahead, a heavy, deliberate crunch. Then another. Footsteps. Slow, unconcerned, moving away from us. The sound of the footsteps in the pines was a physical violation of the night silence. They weren't the hurried, furtive steps of someone trying to hide. They were measured, almost ponderous, a creature unaware or utterly unconcerned with our presence. David's skepticism evaporated in an instant, replaced by the hyper-alert focus of a soldier in contact. His hand went to his sidearm. "Tribal police," he called out, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the cold air. "Identify yourself. Step out where we can see you." The footsteps stopped. The ensuing silence was absolute, oppressive. It was the quiet of a held breath, of a predator listening. I could hear my own pulse thudding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. The beam of my flashlight trembled slightly on the trunk of a ponderosa pine. Protocol 7's directive scrolled through my mind like a teleprompter of dread. Indirect observation only. Do not establish direct ocular contact. We're armed officers. David called again, taking a cautious step forward onto the bed of pine needles. "Make yourself known now." No response. No movement. Just that heavy, waiting silence. "David," I whispered, the word barely audible. "The protocol. We need to fall back, use the mirrors on the cruiser." He shot me a look of pure contempt. His face a mask of hardened professionalism. "It's a person in the woods, Thomas. Standard procedure. Verbal commands, then advance with caution, not fairy tale rules." He turned back toward the darkness. "Last warning. Step out with your hands visible." A twig snapped, loud as a gunshot in the quiet. The footsteps started again, moving deeper into the grove, away from us. It was a provocation, a lure. "It's moving," David stated. He didn't wait for my agreement. He began to follow, his weapon now drawn and held in a low-ready position, his flashlight braced against its barrel. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was wrong, that we were being led into a trap as old as the hills themselves. But I couldn't let him go alone. Cursing under my breath, I fell in behind him, my own gun drawn, my eyes straining not at the darkness ahead, but at the periphery, at the reflections in the wet bark of trees, trying to obey the spirit of the protocol while following my partner. We moved like ghosts ourselves, the thick blanket of pine needles muffling our steps. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of rich decay and resin. Our flashlight beams created a chaotic cage of moving shadows, making every stump and branch seem to writhe. The footsteps ahead maintained their steady, infuriating pace, always just out of sight, leading us deeper. After about 100 yards, the trees thinned slightly, opening into a small, natural clearing bisected by the shallow, gurgling creek. Moonlight filtered down in fractured silver pieces. And there, on the far side of the clearing, standing at the water's edge with its back to us, was the figure. It was tall, easily 6.5 feet, wearing a dark, bulky jacket and jeans. It stood perfectly still, a silhouette against the shimmering water. It was facing away, its head oriented downstream. Seeing it, so concrete and present, made the surreal horror of the situation crystallize into a sharp, immediate fear. This was no hallucination. This was a physical entity that had left tracks that disappeared, that had lured us here. David halted at the edge of the clearing. I came up beside him, my mouth dry. "Sir," David's voice was firm, but I heard the new tension in it. The recognition that this was no ordinary transient. This is the tribal police. You need to turn around slowly and keep your hands where I can see them. The figure did not move, didn't flinch. It might as well have been a statue. "Turn around. Now!" David barked, his command echoing off the trees. For a long, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slow, almost mechanical smoothness, the figure began to turn. It pivoted on its heels, rotating its body toward us. The process seemed to take an eternity. First, the shoulder, then the profile. I forced my eyes away from the center, looking instead at the figure's feet, then up to its chest, using my peripheral vision. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. Then I saw it. As the turn continued, the back of its head came into view. Protruding from the crown like a malignant growth was a second face. It was smaller, the features crude and compressed as if modeled from wet clay that had partially slumped. But it was unmistakably a face, a slitted eye, the bump of a nose, a lipless gash of a mouth, frozen in what looked like a silent snarl. It was looking backward, toward the way we had come. The primary face, now fully forward, was that of a middle-aged indigenous man, with a strong jaw and high cheekbones. Its expression was utterly, profoundly blank. Empty, not angry, not scared, not curious. Void. David was directly in his line of sight. He was staring, his trained officer's assessment locking onto the suspect's face for identification, for threat indicators. He was making direct eye contact. "David, don't look." I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. It was too late. I saw his body go rigid, not the tense readiness of a cop in a standoff, but a total paralytic lock. His arms, holding the flashlight and weapon, froze in place. His back arched slightly. His eyes, wide open, were glued to the forward face of the double walker. A thin line of drool escaped the corner of his mouth. He was there, but he was gone, trapped behind his own eyes. The double walker's primary face showed no reaction, but its arms began to rise from its sides. The motion was stiff, unnatural. As the elbows bent, the fabric of the jacket sleeves strained and then tore. Protruding from each joint was a long, curved spike of bone, slick and white in the moonlight. They were indeed like polished wood, or more accurately, like obsidian knives, wickedly sharp, organic size grown from its own skeleton. The blades caught the light as they lifted, positioning themselves for a downward, killing arc aimed at David's frozen, defenseless form. If the subject closes to within 10 paces, discharge your weapon without establishing a direct sight picture. It was within 5. Terror, pure and electric, shot through me. There was no time for thought, only ingrained training and the desperate memory of the protocol. I did not aim. I couldn't look directly at it to aim. I shut my eyes tight, turned my head away, raised my service weapon in the general direction of the looming shape, and pulled the trigger. The roar of the gunshot was cataclysmic in the silent clearing. 1 shot, 2, 3, 4. The sound waves hammered against the trees and rolled away. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, expecting to feel those bone blades tearing into me at any second. When nothing happened, I risked cracking one eye open. The clearing was empty. The double walker was gone, vanished as completely as its tracks had earlier. Only the ringing in my ears and the sharp scent of cordite proved the shots had been real. David was on his knees in the wet grass, coughing and gagging. sucky and huge, ragged breaths as if he'd been drowning. He dropped his flashlight, his hands braced on the ground. I sprinted to him, my own limbs trembling. "David, are you hit? Look at me." He shook his head violently, still gasping. He couldn't speak. He pushed my hands away when I tried to check him for wounds, a gesture of raw, animal denial. After a minute, his breathing began to steady into shuddering gulps. What was... He finally choked out, not looking at me. "It was Protocol 7, I said, my voice low and urgent. "You looked at it. Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" "No, I'm fine." He said the words with forced vehemence. Try to rebuild the shattered wall of his reality. He clumsily retrieved his flashlight and weapon, his movements uncoordinated. I just locked up. Adrenaline dump. It happens. It was just a guy. A weird guy. He was convincing himself, sentence by sentence. "David, it had two faces. You saw it. It had blades in its elbows." "I saw a mask," he snapped, finally looking at me. His eyes were haunted, but a stubborn fire was rekindling in them. Some psycho in a fucking elaborate mask. "You started blasting and he ran. That's all. The blades were sticks or something. It was dark." He stood up, swaying slightly. "We need to secure the scene. Call it in." He was retreating into procedure, the familiar refuge of a report and a perimeter. I knew arguing was pointless. The mind will reject what it cannot process. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4. Martha's voice came back instantly. "Go ahead, Unit 4. Shots fired at our location near Riverbend Creek. No officer injuries. Suspect fled the scene. Disappeared into the wooded area. Requesting additional units to establish a search perimeter." I used the sterile, acceptable language. I did not say vanished. I did not say two faces. "Copy. Shots fired. Suspect fled. Units 2 and 5 are responding. ETA 20 minutes. Are you sure you're both unharmed?" I looked at David, who was staring into the trees where the creature had vanished. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "We're secure," I said, standing by. The next 20 minutes passed in a cold, silent purgatory. We didn't speak. David paced the edge of the clearing, his flashlight beam sweeping the trees with mechanical intensity, searching for evidence that would fit his new narrative. A discarded mask, a piece of costume. I stayed by the creek, my mind racing with my grandfather's stories. They were no longer tales. They were a clinical textbook, and I had just witnessed Chapter 1, the paralyzing gaze. My gut churned with dread for what Chapter 2 might be, because my grandfather had said the gaze wasn't just an attack. It was an infection. If you meet its eyes, the change begins. I kept glancing at David at the back of his head, looking for any sign. When the other units arrived, a flurry of flashing lights and serious faces. We gave our statements. I kept to the script. A suspicious subject, non-compliant, advanced on the officer, perceived imminent threat, discharged firearm. Subject fled. David, to my surprise, backed his version, though he was terse and avoided details. A search of the area with 4 more officers and K-9 yielded nothing. No suspect, no blood trail, no discarded items. The only evidence was the 4 spent shell casings from my gun and the torn-up mud where David had knelt. It was unsatisfying and unsettling for everyone. We were relieved for the night. The drive back to the station was a mobile tomb. David stared fixedly out his window. I wanted to reach across the gulf between us, to make him understand the peril he might be in, but his silence was an impregnable fortress. Back at the station, he went straight to the locker room. I sat at my desk, staring at a blank incident report form. How could I possibly write what happened? Officer rendered catatonic by entity's gaze. Entity dematerialized upon taking fire. It would be a one-way ticket to a psych evaluation. I wrote the blandest, most generic report possible and submitted it. As I was leaving, I saw David heading for his truck. "You should come to my place," I said, blocking his path gently. "We should talk this through." "There's nothing to talk through," he said, his voice flat and exhausted. "It was a bad stop. A weird one. It's over. I'm going home to sleep. I feel like hell. A headache." The question escaped before I could stop it. He paused, his hand on his truck door. "Yeah, a splitting one. Since in the clearing. Probably just tension." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "See you tomorrow." He drove off, leaving me standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot. A headache, the first symptom. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I had never used but had been given by an old-timer when I first joined. Walter sits with owls. Retired. Knows the old ways. The phone rang 5 times before a calm, weathered voice answered. "Mr. Sits with Owls. This is Officer Thomas Crowfeather. I'm sorry to call so late, but it's about Protocol 7. My partner, he looked at it tonight." There was a long pause on the line, so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then a sigh that carried the weight of decades. "Where are you?" "At the station." "Come to my house. Now. Do not wait until your next shift." The line went dead. The finality in his tone erased any last vestige of doubt. This was real. This was happening. And David was on a clock I didn't yet know how to read. Walter Sits with Owls lived in a small, weathered house at the end of a dirt track that curled into the foothills like a sleeping snake. No streetlights reached here. The only illumination came from a single kerosene lamp glowing orange in the front window, a lone eye in a vast face of night. I parked my personal truck next to an ancient, rust-pocked Ford and walked up the creaking porch steps. The door opened before I could knock. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his late 80s, but stood straight as a lodgepole pine. His hair was a silver braid over one shoulder. He wore faded jeans and a plaid shirt, but his eyes held a depth and quiet authority that immediately commanded respect. He held a carved pipe, unlit, in one hand. "Thomas Crowfeather," he said, not as a question. His voice was like dry leaves, but strong. "Come in. The coffee is bitter, but it's hot." His home was a museum of a life, lived close to the land. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the ceiling. The walls were lined with shelves holding stones, feathers, and old books. In one corner sat a simple altar with a sweetgrass braid and an eagle feather. The air smelled of cedar smoke, sage, and aged paper. He gestured to a worn armchair and poured black coffee from a tin pot on a wood stove. "Tell me everything," he said, settling into a chair opposite me. "From the moment of the call. Do not leave out a single detail, especially what your partner said and did." So I told him. The call from Martha. Alara Tall Grass's terrified testimony. The tracks that vanished, the deliberate footsteps, the clearing, the slow turn, the second face, the bone blades, David's paralysis, my blind shots, David's denial and his headache. Walter listened without interruption, his dark eyes fixed on mine, absorbing the story. When I finished, he took a long, slow sip of his coffee. "You followed the protocol," he stated. "It saved your life, and maybe your partner's, for now. But you are correct to be afraid for him. What your grandfather told you is true. The gaze of the double walker is a poison. It is a seed of that same darkness, planted in the soul of the one who meets its eyes." He set his cup down carefully. "The transformation is not instantaneous. It gives us a small window. 3 days, sometimes 4. The old ones called it the time of turning. The infected person will first feel a great pain here." He tapped the base of his own skull. "Then, a swelling will form. It will grow, and as it grows, the person's spirit will fray. They will become irritable, angry, prone to violence. They will reject help, reject the old ways, for the darkness must isolate its host to complete its work. What happens when the swelling finishes? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The skin splits, Walter said, his voice devoid of drama, stating a simple, terrible fact. The second face emerges. It is a mirror of the corruption within. When it opens its eyes, the human soul is extinguished. What remains is a new double walker. It will then begin a hunt to spread its own poison, to create more of its kind. It is a spiritual plague. The coffee turned acid in my stomach. How do we stop it? How do we save him? Walter leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. There are two paths. The first is the healing path. There is a ceremony, a wiping away. It can pull the shadow out, cleanse infection. But it requires three things: a medicine man who knows the way, the proper medicines, and, most crucially, the willing participation of the infected one. They must acknowledge the sickness. They must fight it from within, and they must want to be cleansed. And if they won't, I asked, already knowing David's stubborn pride. Walter's face grew graver. Then there is only the second path, the ending path. Once the transformation is complete, the being is no longer your friend. It is a predator wearing his skin. To protect the people, it must be destroyed. And because it is a thing of two spirits, the corrupted human and the invasive darkness, it cannot be killed like a man. The protocol says fire, I whispered, recalling the Stark language. Walter nodded. Fire purifies. It consumes both faces, both spirits, at once. Or, he paused, as if reluctant to give voice to the alternative, a single blow that destroys both brain stems simultaneously. A strike through both faces, back to front. Nothing else will work. Bullets to the heart will only slow it. It will heal and continue. I sat back, overwhelmed. My choices were to somehow convince my combat-hardened, profoundly skeptical partner that he was turning into a monster, or to prepare myself to kill him. The weight of it threatened to crush me. You must watch him closely, Walter instructed. The headache is the first sign. Next will be the swelling. You must get him to me before his anger makes him impossible to reason with. The moment you see the lump, you have perhaps 48 hours. No more. He won't come, I said, despair creeping into my voice. Then you must bring him, Walter said, with a firmness that brooked no argument. By force, if necessary. Use your training. Restrain him. The darkness will give him strength. So you must be swift and sure. Bring him here. I will be ready. He gave me his personal phone number and a small bundle of dried sage. Burn this in your home. It will help keep your own spirit clear. And Thomas, do not look at the back of his head if the face has begun to form. Its gaze, even immature, can also trap you. I drove home as the first gray light of dawn smudged the eastern horizon. I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the bundle of sage smoldering in a clay dish, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. I replayed every second in the clearing, searching for a clue I'd missed, a way out I hadn't seen the MY phone buzz at 9:07 a.m. A text from David. Feel like death. Calling in sick. Don't bother me. David never called in sick. In 8 years, he'd worked through fevers, a broken finger, and the flu. This was sign number 2. I texted back, bad headache? Need me to bring anything? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Just sleep. See you tomorrow. The dismissal was absolute. I called Martha at dispatch. Martha, it's Thomas. Listen, if David calls in or radios anything unusual over the next couple days, call me immediately. day or night. Thomas, what's going on? Her voice was laced with concern. Last night was strange enough. Is he okay? Just keep an ear out for me, please. It's important. She agreed, though I heard the doubt in her silence. The day passed in a haze of anxious exhaustion. I tried to research, but modern search engines had little on Double Walker beyond scattered folklore forums and references in obscure anthropology papers. One doctoral thesis from the 1970s, based on oral histories from Plains tribes, contained a passage that made my blood run cold. The two-faced one is not born but made through a process of spiritual contagion. The victim's own capacity for violence or despair is amplified by the entity's gaze, manifesting as a physical dualism. Curing is considered possible only in early stages, requiring immediate and willing spiritual intervention. Otherwise, termination via total incineration is described as the only sure remedy. I printed it and stared at the clinical words. Termination via total incineration. As evening fell, I knew I had to check on him. I couldn't wait for the third sign to find me. I drove to a small, tidy house on the outskirts of the agency town. His pickup was in the driveway. All the lights were off. I knocked on the door, my heart thudding against my sternum. No answer. I knocked again, louder. David, it's Thomas. I brought food. A lie. But I needed the door open. After a full minute, I heard the lock turn. The door opened a crack. David stood there, silhouetted by the dim light from a hallway. He looked terrible. His skin was pale and waxy, dark circles like bruises under his eyes. He was squinting, as if the weak evening light hurt him. "What?" he said flatly. "Just checking on you. You look awful." "I feel awful. It's just a migraine. Go away. Let me in for a minute. I want to make sure you don't have a fever or something." He hesitated, his body language screaming for me to leave, but some last vestige of our partnership, or perhaps a deep-seated fear he wouldn't acknowledge, made him relent. He turned and shuffled back into the living room, leaving the door open. I followed him in, closing the door behind me. The house was cold, dark, and unusually messy. A blanket was balled on the couch. Dishes were in the sink. David collapsed into an armchair, rubbing his temples. "The light, it's like knives." "David," I said, kneeling in front of his chair, keeping my voice low and calm. "This isn't a migraine. You know it's not. What happened in the clearing, it did something to you. There's a way to fix it. But you have to let me help you." His eyes, red-rimmed and pained, focused on me with sudden intensity. "There is nothing to fix. I got spooked. I had an adrenaline crash. End of story. Now drop it." "I can't drop it. Please, just let me check the back of your head. If there's nothing there, I'll leave and never mention it again." A flicker of raw fear crossed his face, quickly masked by anger. "Get out, Thomas." "One look. That's all." I said, "Get out." He surged up from the chair with a speed that was shocking. His hand shot out and shoved me hard in the chest. The force was immense, more than I'd ever felt from him. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table. A lamp crashed to the floor. We stood there, breathing heavily in the dark room. His anger was a tangible heat radiating from him. This was the fraying Walter had warned about. "Okay," I said, raising my hands in a placating gesture. "Okay, David, I'm going. But please, just think about what I said. There's a man who can help. His name is Walter Sits with Owls. He's a retired cop. He knows about this. Get out." The words were a guttural growl. I left. As I walked to my truck, I saw his shadow move to the window, watching me until I drove away. The infection was progressing faster than Walter's timeline. The anger, the physical aggression, the darkness was taking hold. I drove straight back to Walter's house. It was fully dark now. I told him what happened. The shove, the disproportionate strength, the refusal. "We are out of time for persuasion," Walter said, his face grim. He was already moving, gathering items from around his home, a woven bag, a clay pot, bundles of herbs. "We must act tonight. The ceremony is dangerous. The darkness will fight to stay. He will be strong and violent. You must get him here, and you must hold him for the duration. Can you do this?" I thought of David's shove, the animal rage in his eyes. "I have to." Walter nodded. "Then go now. Do not wait. Use your handcuffs, your training. Bring him. I will prepare the space." The drive back to David's house was the longest of my life. I was no longer a friend paying a visit. I was an officer preparing for a high-risk extraction of a dangerous, unstable subject. My duty was clear, but it felt like the deepest betrayal. In my trunk, I had a set of heavy-duty zip ties used for securing unruly suspects, a first aid kit, and a thick blanket. My service weapon was holstered at my side, but I prayed I wouldn't need it. His house was still dark. I parked down the street and approached on foot, moving quietly. I tested the front door. Still unlocked. That was a bad sign. The old David was meticulous about security. The new thing growing inside him didn't care. I pushed the door open slowly. "David, it's Thomas again. I'm coming in." The living room was empty. The house was silent, but it was the silence of a coiled spring. A faint, sour smell hung in the air, sweat and something else, metallic and wrong. "David." A low groan came from the bedroom. I moved down the short hallway, my hand resting on my weapon. The bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open with my foot. David was on the bed, on his side, facing the wall. He was shaking, not shivering, but trembling with a fine, constant vibration, as if a current was running through him. "David, we're going for a ride. Walter can help you. You need to come with me." He didn't answer. He just kept shaking. "I'm not asking, partner." I moved to the side of the bed, pulling the zip ties from my pocket. "I'm going to help you up." As I reached for his shoulder, he moved. It was a blur. He rolled off the far side of the bed and came up in a crouch, his back to me. His head was down. And there, in the dim light from the hallway, I saw it. The lump at the base of his skull was no longer the size of a walnut. It was the size of a fist, straining against his skin and hair. The surface was mottled, reddish-purple, and it seemed to have a faint, rhythmic pulse of its own. In its center, I could just make out the faint, terrible indentations of features, the line of a closed eyelid, the ridge of a nose. The second face was forming. Time seemed to congeal in that horrible moment. The thing on the back of David's head was an obscenity, a violation of everything natural. The faint, sculpted lines of the nascent face were more terrifying than any fully formed monster could be. It was the process, the becoming, that chilled the soul. He stayed crouched, his back to me, his shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. "David," I said, my voice a strained whisper. "Please, look at me. Talk to me." A wet, clicking sound came from him, but not from his mouth. It emanated from the lump, a grotesque mimicry of a tongue trying to form words. The primary David, my partner, slowly turned his head to look at me over his shoulder. Only one of his eyes was visible, and it was a maelstrom of terror, pain, and a fury that was not his own. The human David was still in there, drowning. "It hurts," he rasped, the words slurred and thick, as if his mouth was full of cotton. "Thomas, make it stop." This was my opening. The man was asking for help. "I will, David. I promise. But you have to come with me. Right now. We have to go to Walter." He shook his head, a jerky, painful-looking motion. Can't, it says can't leave. His gaze drifted, focusing on nothing. It's so loud. It was the darkness, speaking to him from inside his own crumbling mind. Walter had warned me. The infection isolates. I couldn't afford a debate. The time for asking was over. I'm sorry, brother, I said, and lunged. I grabbed for his left arm, aiming to twist it behind his back and get a cuff on. My fingers closed around his wrist. His skin was fever hot. The moment I touched him, the David I knew vanished completely, submerged by the defensive rage of the invader. He roared a raw, animal sound and spun with terrifying force, wrenching his arm free. His other hand, balled into a fist, came around in a wild arc. I ducked, feeling the wind of it brush my hair, and drove my shoulder into his midsection, tackling him back onto the bed. He fought like a man possessed, which he was. Blows rained down on my back and shoulders, not the trained strikes of a Marine, but the frantic, powerful thrashing of a cornered beast. I managed to get one zip tie around his right wrist, but he yanked it away before I could secure the other, the plastic biting deep into his skin. He bucked, throwing me off. I landed on the floor, scrambling back as he loomed over me. His eyes, now completely alien, glowed with a faint, sickly yellow tinge in the dark. Mine, he growled, the voice layered, as if two people were speaking just out of sync. He kicked out, his boot connected with my thigh. Pain exploded, but it cleared my head. This wasn't David. Not anymore. This was the sickness, wearing my friend like a suit. I rolled, came up, and drew my weapon. I didn't aim it at him. I couldn't. Instead, I reversed my grip, and as he charged again, I sidestepped and brought the hard polymer grip down in a short, sharp arc onto the side of his neck. Just above the collarbone, a brachial stun. He grunted, his charge faltering, his body going momentarily slack. It was the opening I needed. I dropped the gun, grabbed both his arms, and forced him behind his back. This time, I got the zip ties secured, pulling it tight until it locked. He roared again, thrashing, trying to headbutt me with the back of his skull with a forming face. I jerked my head back, remembering Walter's warning. I couldn't let it look at me. Using the blanket from the bed, I wrapped it around his head and upper body, muffling his roars and obscuring the terrible lump. He kicked and struggled, but with his arms secured and his vision blocked, his coordination was gone. I wrestled him, fireman style, over my shoulder, the weight of him nearly buckling my knees. The infected strength was waning, replaced by a desperate, chaotic energy. I staggered out of the bedroom, down the hall, and out the front door into the cool night air. Getting him into the passenger seat of my truck was a brutal, graceless struggle. I finally managed to shove him in, used 2 more zip ties to secure his bound wrist to the metal frame of the seat, and slammed the door. He was howling and throwing himself against the restraints, the blanket slipping to reveal his wild, hate-filled eyes. I jumped in the driver's side, started the engine, and peeled away from the curb. The drive to Walter's was a nightmare. David alternated between snarling curses in a guttural voice and begging for help in his own. "Please, Thomas, kill me. Just kill me before it," he'd sob. Then seconds later, he'd be smashing his head against the window, laughing a thin, cruel sound. The duality was heartbreaking. I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, repeating Walter's name like a mantra. When I pulled into Walter's yard, the old man was already outside, waiting. He had changed into simple, dark clothing. A small fire crackled in a stone pit in front of his porch, and the air was heavy with the scent of burning sweetgrass and sage. He took in the scene, the thrashing figure in my truck, the desperation on my face, and nodded once. All business. Bring him to the fire. Be careful of the back of his head. Together, we untethered David from the seat and dragged him, kicking and screaming, to a spot near the fire. Walter had prepared a clean, worn deer hide on the ground. We forced David onto his stomach on the hide. Walter produced a longer, stronger leather cord and, with surprising efficiency, bound David's ankles together and then tethered his bound wrists to his ankles, forcing him into a bowed position, his back exposed. The forming face was pointed at the earth. David's screams turned to muffled sobs against the hide. "Make it stop, please, make it stop," Walter began. He sprinkled a circle of crushed yellow pollen around David, then another of crushed bluestone. He lit a tightly wound bundle of herbs, cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and others I didn't recognize, and let the smoke wash over David's prone form, chanting a low, rhythmic stream of our ancestral language. The words were old, older than the reservation, older than the country. They were sounds of binding, of cleansing, of calling upon forces of light and order. At first, David just trembled. Then, as Walter's chant grew in intensity, the lump on his neck began to move. It swelled and contracted, as if something beneath the skin was fighting to breathe. David's body arched in agony, a scream tearing from his throat that was pure, undiluted torment. The skin over the lump grew taut, shiny. The indentations of the face became sharper, more defined. The eyelid slit twitched. "It's fighting the ceremony." I yelled over the chanting and David's screams. "Hold him down," Walter commanded, never breaking his rhythmic song. The shadow does not want to leave its home. I threw my body across David's legs, pinning him as he convulsed. Walter leaned closer, blowing smoke directly onto the pulsating lump. He then took a small bone whistle and blew a single, piercing note that seemed to cut through the very night. The lump burst, not with blood or gore, but with a thick, black, vaporous substance that hissed as it met the smoke-filled air. It streamed out of David's skin like ink from a squid, coiling and twisting in the firelight before dissipating into nothingness. The physical swelling collapsed immediately, deflating like a punctured bladder, leaving behind only inflamed, reddened skin. David gave one final, shuddering gasp and went completely limp. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Walter's slowing breaths. He stopped chanting, swaying slightly on his feet from the exertion. I slowly climbed off David, my own body trembling with adrenaline and relief. "Is it?" I couldn't finish. Walter knelt, placing a gentle hand on David's back. He felt for a pulse at his neck, then carefully inspected the base of the skull. The skin was raw and angry, but it was just skin. The monstrous second face was gone, leaving no trace but the memory. "The darkness is expelled," Walter said, his voice hoarse. "The seed is plucked out. He is weak and his spirit is bruised, but he is himself again. He will sleep for a long time now. The natural healing must begin." We carried David's unconscious form into Walter's spare room and laid him on a cot. His breathing was deep and even, his face peaceful for the first time since the clearing. The human agony was gone. I slumped into a chair beside the cot, feeling the weight of the last 48 hours crash down on me all at once. We had done it. We had pulled him back from a brink. Walter brought me a cup of bitter tea. "Drink. You have walked in a dark place tonight." "Thank you." I said, the words inadequate. "You saved his life." "We did," he corrected. "You brought him. You held him. That was the harder part." He looked at the sleeping David, his expression somber. "But remember, Thomas, we cured the infection. We did not kill the source. The double walker that did this to him is still out there. It will be hunting, and it will be angry that its new creation was taken from it." The relief I felt curdled into a new, cold dread. I had been so focused on saving David, I'd pushed the original threat from my mind. Where would it go? "To a place of pain," Walter said, staring into the darkness beyond the window. A place where many spirits are restless. It will feed on that energy, and it will look for new eyes to corrupt. My police radio, which I had left on the kitchen table, crackled to life with a sudden, urgent burst of static. Martha's voice was tight with controlled panic. All units, emergency traffic, reports of a disturbance at the Hill of the Sleeping Buffalo. Multiple callers reporting a tall figure attacking people. Descriptions indicate possible subject with facial disfigurement. All available units respond. Use extreme caution. Unit 4, Unit 2, are you copying? The Sleeping Buffalo. It was an old ceremonial site, now a historical landmark. But more importantly, it was near the location of a tragic, lesser-known massacre from the 1890s. A place of profound, unresolved pain. I looked at Walter. He looked at my radio, then back at me and gave a single, grave nod. David was saved. But the thing that had almost taken him was now unleashing its fury on the innocent, in a place swimming with sorrow. My duty was no longer to my partner alone. It was to everyone in the path of this nightmare. I picked up the radio. My voice sounded steady, foreign to my own ears. Dispatch, Unit 4 copies. I am en route. ETA 10 minutes. Advise all units. Protocol 7 is in full effect. Do not, I repeat, do not make direct visual contact with the subject. Acknowledge. There was a stunned pause from Martha, then a hesitant, copy, Unit 4. Protocol 7 acknowledged. Be safe, Thomas. I looked at Walter. Stay with him. I will. But, Thomas, you cannot face this alone. Not again. I don't have a choice, I said, checking my weapon, making sure I had spare magazines. My mind was already shifting, moving from the desperate rescue to the tactical problem of hunting a supernatural predator, fire or a simultaneous strike. I had no flamethrower. I had a service pistol, a shotgun in the truck, and my wits. Then remember to land, Walter said, following me to the door. It is older than the darkness. Use it. Lure it. The creature is drawn to fear, but is bound by physical form. Trick its senses. I nodded, the old man's words filing away in my tactical brain. Lure it. Trick it. The beginnings of a desperate, dangerous plan began to form as I ran to my truck. David was safe. Now, I had to make sure no one else would need Walter's healing, because the next person to look into that thing's eyes might not have someone to bring them back. And if I failed tonight, the Hill of the Sleeping Buffalo would become a new ground of sorrow, and the thing wearing two faces would grow stronger, its shadow stretching longer across our lands. The night swallowed my truck as I sped toward the Hill of the Sleeping Buffalo. Walter's words echoed in my head, a stark counterpoint to the urgent dispatches crackling over the radio. Unit 2 on scene. We've got multiple civilians down. Jesus. Requesting medical immediately. The officer's voice was frayed, hovering on the edge of control. Another unit chimed in, their transmission breaking up. Subject sighted moving east toward the old rock formations, extremely fast. 7 was just words on a page to them. They hadn't seen the blank forward face or the snarling visage on the back of the skull. They hadn't felt the paralytic terror of its gaze. My hands were cold and slick on the steering wheel. My plan was half-formed madness, born of Walter's advice and pure desperation. Lure it. Trick its senses. Fire purifies. The Sleeping Buffalo was a low, humpbacked hill sacred to the local bands, now a county park with gravel lot and interpretive signs. As I skidded into the empty parking lot, the scene was one of surreal horror. 2 patrol cars sat with their doors hanging open, light bars painting the swirling mist in frenetic red and blue. Near the path to the hilltop, I saw the first body, a young man in a jacket, lying twisted on the ground. Then another, an older woman. Their postures were eerily similar. Not the relaxed sprawl of unconsciousness, but the rigid, arrested poses as statues, frozen in mid-flight or self-defense. The fatal wounds were visible even from a distance. Deep, precise punctures high on the torso, just under the ribs. The work of the elbow blades. My partner from Unit 2, a good officer named Ben, was kneeling by the woman, his face ashen. He looked up as I ran over. "Thomas, my God, what is this? They're just frozen. Their eyes are open, but they're not here. And the wounds, I've never seen anything like it. Where did it go?" I asked, my eyes already scanning the dark tree line and the jumble of ancient boulders at the hill's crest, east into the rocks. It was fast, not running, just moving. And Thomas, I think I saw. He trailed off, unwilling to give the impossible image voice. "You saw two faces." I finished for him. His shocked nod was all the confirmation I needed. "Listen to me, Ben. This is Protocol 7. It's real. If you see it, you do not look at it. You use reflections. Your side mirror, your watch face, anything. If it gets close, you shoot without aiming. You understand? Your life depends on it." He stared at me, his training worn with the evidence before his eyes. Finally, he gave a grim nod. "What's the plan?" "I'm going up there. I need you to secure this area. Keep everyone back. No one follows me. If you have road flares in your unit, give them all to me, and your fire extinguisher." Ben didn't question it. He ran to his cruiser and came back with a heavy box of highway flares and a red metal extinguisher. As I took them, a sound drifted down from the hilltop, a low, chittering laugh that seemed to come from two throats at once, slightly out of sync. It was a sound of mockery and hunger. The double walker was still here, and it knew more prey had arrived. "Call for every unit you can," I told Ben, "but tell them the rules. Protocol 7, no direct contact." I left him and started up the winding path, the extinguisher slung over my shoulder, the box of flares in my hand. My senses were hyper-alert, not just sight and sound, but a deeper, older instinct my grandfather called listening with the skin. The hill felt wrong. The usual night sounds, crickets, the rustle of rodents, were absent. The air was still and cold, carrying the iron scent of blood and a subtler, greasy odor like spoiled meat. I reached the crown of the hill, a flattened area dotted with massive, weathered granite stones, the rock formation from a radio. In the center stood the largest stone, the sleeping buffalo itself, a natural formation that vaguely resembled a reclining beast. And there, posed against it as if waiting for a portrait, was the double walker. Moonlight bleached its features. The forward face was different from the one in the cottonwood grove. This one was younger, with long hair, but the same chilling emptiness was in its eyes. The second face, fully formed on the back of its head, was a grotesque parody, its single visible eye wide and staring, its mouth fixed in a rictus grin. The bone blades, slick with dark fluid, were fully extended from its elbows, held slightly away from his body like a mantis ready to strike. It didn't move toward me. It just watched. Both sets of eyes tracked me as I slowly set down the extinguisher and the flares. My shotgun was in my hands. I remembered my training, Walter's warning, the protocol. I did not look directly at it. I kept my gaze focused on its chest, using my peripheral vision to monitor the deadly blades. I needed to draw it away from this open ground, toward a trap. "I took your new friend," I said aloud, my voice sounding small against the stone. "The one you tried to make for my partner. We cleaned him out. He's free." A low growl rumbled from both its mouths. The forward face remained placid, but the backward face twisted in fury. I had struck a nerve. It took a step toward me, its movement fluid and unerringly silent. "He's gone." I pressed, taking a step back, leading it toward the western edge of the hill where the trees grew thickest. "Your poison didn't take. All that's left is you. The last one." It quickened its pace. I backpedaled, keeping my movements calm, deliberate. I couldn't run, or it would charge. I had to make it follow, make it believe I was prey it could corner. The trees were 20 yards away. 15. The chittering laugh came again, closer now. It knew I was leading it, but its arrogance was vast. It believed itself the hunter, always. At the tree line, I turned and ran. It came after me instantly, a blur of dark motion. I heard the whisper of its blades cutting the air as it closed the distance with terrifying speed. I dove behind a thick ponderosa pine, the bark exploding in splinters as a blade sheared through it, missing me by inches. I rolled, came up, and without looking, fired the shotgun in the direction of the sound. The deafening boom was followed by a shriek of pain, the high, layered cry of the double walker. I risked a glance via the reflection in the concave lens of my flashlight. One of the bone blades on its right arm was shattered into jagged fragments. It clutched the stump, blackish fluid oozing from the joint. But the left blade was still intact, and its rage was now a physical force. In the clearing, IT lunged again. I scrambled backward, firing the shotgun one-handed. The shot went wide, peppering the trees. I was out of space, my back against a rocky outcrop. It loomed over me, the intact left blade rising for a final thrust. Both faces were now contorted in identical expressions of triumphant hunger. This was it. I had lured it, but my trap was nowhere near ready. In a final desperate move, I grabbed the fire extinguisher I dropped, pulled the pin, and sprayed the thick, white chemical foam directly into its forward face. The double walker recoiled, blinded and choking. The foam coated its eyes, its mouths. It staggered back, clawing at its face with its good arm. It was my only chance. I turned and ran, not deeper into the woods, but back toward the hilltop, toward my original destination, the park's old metal maintenance shed near the parking lot. I heard behind me, recovering quickly, its footsteps a furious drumbeat on the hard earth. I poured on every ounce of speed, my lungs burning. The shed was a small, windowless structure. I wrenched the door open, slammed it behind me, and plunged into pitch blackness. My hands found what I was looking for, the distinct, cylindrical feel of propane tanks for the park's grills. 2 of them. The door of the shed exploded inward with a shriek of tearing metal. The double walker filled the doorway, silhouetted against the lesser darkness outside. It was coated in drying foam, which made it look like a monstrous, living statue. Its one good blade gleamed. The shed was my trap, but I was now in it with the monster. It stepped inside. There was barely room for both of us. The stench of it, decay and that greasy spoilage, filled the small space. I held my ground, a road flare in one hand, my lighter in the other. "Fire purifies," I said, my voice steady. It seemed to understand the threat. It hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all I needed. I struck the flare. A blinding, hissing crimson light filled the shed, painting the creature in hellish tones. It flinched from the sudden brilliance. I didn't throw the flare at it. I threw it at the base of the 2 propane tanks, leaning against the wall behind me. Then I dropped to the floor and covered my head. The double walker, confused by my action, took a step forward, its blade poised to strike down at my prone form. The world turned white, then orange. The explosion wasn't the Hollywood fireball I'd imagined. It was a concussive whump that sucked the air from my lungs and lifted me off the floor, slamming me into the far wall. Heat, immediate and intense, washed over me. The shed ceased to exist as a structure. Metal panels became shrapnel. The door vanished. Through ringing ears and swimming vision, I saw the double walker engulfed in a roaring pillar flame. It was at the epicenter of the blast, doused in burning propane. The scream it emitted was unlike any sound I had ever heard. 2 voices, the human and the demonic, screaming in unison as they were consumed. The flames burned unnaturally bright and hot. Clinging to its form as it thrashed and stumbled back out of the ruin of the shed, IT took 10 steps, a walking torch, before its legs gave out. It collapsed onto gravel of the parking lot, a blackening, twisting shape within the heart of the fire. The forward face melted like wax. The backward face crinkled and cracked like old leather. The bone blades glowed red-hot, then brittle, then shattered. The dual screaming tapered into a single, fading wail, and then into silence, broken only by the crackle of the flames. I dragged myself out of the smoldering wreckage, my ears ringing, my body a symphony of new pains. My uniform was singed, and I could feel burns on my hands and neck. But I was alive. I crawled to a safe distance and watched the fire burn down to embers, consuming every last fragment of the creature. Ben and other arriving officers found me there, sitting on the ground, staring at the ashes. The medical examiner would later call it an unidentifiable burn victim, citing a probable propane leak accident. The official report would be a masterpiece of plausible omissions. But everyone who was there that night, who saw the frozen bodies, who heard the stories, knew. The memo that came down from the tribal council a week later was quietly definitive. Protocol 7 was to be incorporated into all future officer training, with a special seminar led by Walter Sits with Owls and myself. David recovered. It took weeks. The physical mark on his neck faded to a faint scar, but the psychological wounds were deeper. He took a desk job for a while, then requested to lead the new Protocol 7 training program. He teaches it with the fervor of a convert, his first-hand account a powerful tool against skepticism. We still work together, but the dynamic has changed. We share a knowledge that is a burden and a bond. The darkness isn't gone. A month after the incident at Sleeping Buffalo, we got a call from the neighboring reservation. 3 bodies, frozen expressions, puncture wounds. Descriptions of a tall walker. We went as advisors, taking Walter with us. We taught them the protocol. They handled it, with fire near an abandoned mine shaft. This is the work now, not just policing the visible world, but guarding the thin places where the older world still bleeds through. The 7 protocols are our guide. We follow them, we teach them, and we wait for the next call, because the land remembers, and some of the things that walk it are not, and have never been, human. Our duty is to stand watch, to remember the old stories, and to be ready with fire and clarity when the darkness takes a shape we can finally fight. If you follow this account to its end, you now carry a piece of that silence after the gunshots, the smell of sage mixing with cordite, the weight of a choice no one should ever have to make. This story lives in the space between our modern world and the truths that were ancient before the first border was drawn. It's a reality for those who walk the edges, who listen to the stories the land never stopped telling. This isn't just a tale. It's a glimpse into a hidden layer of duty, where the rule book is whispered, not printed, and the oldest protocols are the ones that keep you alive. For every story like this one that reaches the light, 100 others remain in the dark. Unfiled reports, glances exchanged between night shift partners, the unexplained chill on a summer night. This is the mission of Winds of Thought. We are a channel dedicated to mapping that hidden territory. We bring you first-hand accounts from a frontier where reality blurs, from officers, guides, loggers, and storytellers who have stood where the light fails and the old rules apply. We don't deal in fantasy. We document the unsettling, the unexplained, and the enduring truths that persist in the shadows of our modern age. Your engagement is what allows us to find these voices and share these stories. It signals that there's an audience for truth, however strange, and a community for those who know that the world is deeper and more mysterious than it appears. Here is how you can directly support this mission. 1. Like this video. That simple click is a powerful signal. It tells the algorithm that content of substance, with depth and respect for real experiences, deserves to be seen. It pushes this story past the noise and helps others who need to hear it find their way here. 2. subscribe to Winds of Thought. Turn on notifications. By subscribing, you're not just adding another channel to a list. You're joining a watch. You're ensuring you're here for the next account from the deep woods, the next protocol from Forgotten Manual, the next true story from the edge of understanding. We are a growing community of the curious, the skeptical, and the brave, and your membership matters. 3. Share your perspective. The comments section is not an afterthought. It's a vital part of this exploration. Was there a detail in the protocols that resonated with you? Do you have a family story or a personal experience that echoes these themes? Share it. Your story adds another piece to the map. I read the comments personally, and they often guide future investigations. Let's discuss. Which of the 7 protocols would you find most difficult to follow and why? Your insight contributes to the collective understanding. 4. Share this video with one person. Think of someone who appreciates a story grounded in reality, someone who senses there's more to the world. Share it with a friend, a family member, or in a community where stories matter. Personal recommendation is the most powerful way for important narratives to travel. Help us build this network of the genuinely curious. By taking these actions, you do more than consume content. You become part of safeguarding these narratives. You help create a space where real people can share real encounters without dismissal or ridicule. You ensure that the whispers from the edge don't fade into silence. The work doesn't stop. The watch continues. There are always more stories, more voices from the borderlands waiting to be heard. With your support, Winds of Thought will be here to bring them to light. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your trust. Now it's your turn to act. Like, subscribe, and join us in the comments. Let's continue this exploration together. Stay aware.